At 7:15 p.m. on March 29, 1975, 16-year-old Sharron Pryor left her home on Willowbroad Avenue on Montreal. She was walking to Marina's restaurant, just blocks away. She never arrived. 3 days later, her body was discovered in a wooded area in Longueuil, on Montreal's South Shore. The discovery sent shockwaves through Quebec, launching one of Canada's longest-running murder investigations. For 48 years, the streets of Pointe St. Charles held this secret. For 48 years, a mother waited for answers about what happened during her daughter's final walk. In 2023, science would finally reveal the truth that had been buried since that spring evening in 1975.
In 1975, Pointe St. Charles was a tight-knit, working-class Montreal neighborhood where families knew their neighbors by name. The Pryor family lived on Willowbroad Avenue, where 16-year-old Sharron shared a home with her mother Yvonne and her sisters Linda and Doreen. Sharron was a student at St. Patrick's High School, where classmates knew her as a friendly, outgoing teenager. She was particularly close to her mother Yvonne, who described her as a responsible girl who always let her know where she was going. That Saturday, March 29, had been routine. Around 7:15 p.m., Sharron prepared to meet her friends at Marina's restaurant on Center Street, a popular local spot just a few blocks from home. The walk was familiar, one she'd made many times before through their neighborhood streets. Sharron put on her spring jacket and told her mother she wouldn't be long. She stepped out into the early spring evening, heading towards Center Street where her friends were waiting. It was the last time Yvonne Pryor would see her daughter alive.
On March 29, 1975, Sharron Pryor left her home at 1237 Willowbroad Avenue in Montreal's Pointe St. Charles neighborhood. Her destination was Marina's restaurant on Center Street, just 3 blocks away. The 16-year-old had walked this route countless times before. At 7:15 p.m., she said goodbye to her mother Yvonne and headed out into the early spring evening. The walk should have taken less than 10 minutes. Marina's restaurant was a popular gathering spot where local teenagers often met on weekends. Sharron had told her mother she was meeting friends for pizza, a routine Saturday evening plan. But this time, she never arrived at her destination. What happened in those 3 blocks between Willowbroad Avenue and Center Street would remain a mystery that haunted Montreal for nearly 5 decades. Sharron Pryor, a student at St. Patrick's High School, simply vanished. When Sharron didn't arrive at Marina's, concern quickly spread. This was completely out of character for her. Those who knew Sharron described her as responsible and reliable, especially when it came to keeping her mother informed of her whereabouts. The Pryor family, including Sharron's sisters Linda and Doreen, knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. The Montreal police were notified of her disappearance. As word spread through Pointe St. Charles, the close-knit community mobilized. Search parties formed, combing through the neighborhood streets. Local media began covering the story of the missing teenager, and Sharron's photograph appeared in Montreal newspapers. The weekend passed with no sign of Sharron. Then on Monday, March 31st, came the devastating discovery. Sharron's body was found in a wooded area near Chemin du Lac in Longueuil, on Montreal's South Shore. The medical examination confirmed she had been sexually assaulted and murdered. The location where she was found, miles from where she had disappeared, immediately raised questions for investigators. The discovery transformed Montreal's Pointe St. Charles. The neighborhood, where children had previously moved freely between homes and shops, was gripped by fear. The 3-block stretch where Sharron had vanished became a stark reminder of an unthinkable tragedy. For Yvonne Pryor, the nightmare was just beginning. Her daughter had disappeared just blocks from home, on streets they both knew well. Now, instead of waiting for Sharron to come home, she faced the unbearable task of laying her daughter to rest. The case presented investigators with challenging questions. How had someone managed to abduct a teenage girl from a populated neighborhood without witnesses? Why was her body found miles away in Longwy? The killer had somehow transported Sharron across the city, suggesting detailed knowledge of the area. The Montreal police faced one of their most complex investigations. The crime scene in Longwy provided evidence that would be preserved for decades, evidence that would eventually prove crucial. But in 1975, as detectives began their work, they knew only that they were searching for someone who had committed a brutal crime in the heart of their city. The hunt for Sharron Pryor's killer would become one of Canada's longest-running murder investigations, spanning nearly half a century before modern science would finally provide answers.
The discovery of Sharron Pryor's body in Longueuil on March 31, 1975, launched one of Quebec's most complex murder investigations. The crime scene near Chemin du Lac revealed the brutal nature of the attack. Sharron had been sexually assaulted and murdered. The medical examiner's findings confirmed the family's worst fears. The case immediately presented unique challenges. Two police forces had to coordinate their efforts: the Montreal police, where the abduction occurred in Pointe-Saint-Charles, and the Longueuil authorities, where Sharron's body was found. The distance between these locations suggested the killer had transported her across jurisdictions, complicating the investigation. At the crime scene, investigators collected crucial physical evidence. Most significantly, they preserved biological evidence from the sexual assault, a decision that would prove vital decades later. In 1975, DNA testing didn't exist, but the careful preservation of this evidence would eventually become the key to solving the case. The investigation in Pointe-Saint-Charles focused on reconstructing Sharron's last known movements. Police knew she left her home at 1237 Willowbroad Avenue at 7:15 p.m., heading toward Marina's restaurant on Center Street. This 3-block route became the focal point of their inquiry. Investigators interviewed residents, searched for witnesses, and examined every possible path Sharron might have taken. Detective teams worked through extensive leads. They investigated known offenders in the area and similar cases across the region. However, despite intensive police work, no clear suspect emerged. The killer had managed to abduct a teenager from a populated neighborhood and transport her across the city without leaving an obvious trail. The case received significant media attention across Quebec. Each development was closely followed as police continued their search for answers. For the Pryor family, particularly Sharron's mother Yvonne, the lack of progress was devastating. The evidence collected in those crucial first days would remain safely preserved in police custody. Though investigators in 1975 couldn't have known it, the biological evidence they carefully maintained would eventually lead to a breakthrough through advanced DNA technology. But that resolution would take nearly half a century to achieve. For 48 years, Sharron Pryor's murder remained one of Canada's most persistent cold cases. Throughout these decades, her mother, Yvonne Pryor, never gave up her quest for justice, keeping Sharron's story alive and working tirelessly with investigators to find answers. The preserved biological evidence from 1975 held the key to solving the case, but technology needed to catch up with the evidence. As DNA analysis evolved, investigators maintained careful custody of this crucial evidence, knowing it might someday provide the breakthrough they needed. The significant turning point came in 2019. The Montreal Police Cold Case Unit decided to apply new forensic genealogy techniques to Sharron's case. This emerging science combined advanced DNA analysis with genealogical research, a method that had successfully solved other decades-old cases across North America. In 2022, investigators achieved their first major breakthrough. The preserved DNA evidence from the 1975 crime scene yielded a viable profile that could be used with genetic genealogy databases. This launched an intensive investigation, with researchers meticulously building family trees and tracking potential suspects through genealogical records. The genetic detective work led to one name: Franklin Maywood Romine. Further investigation revealed that Romine had lived in Montreal in 1975, placing him in the city at the time of Sharron's murder. He had later returned to the United States, where he died in Virginia in 1982. In May 2023, the Montreal police made their historic announcement. The DNA evidence from the 1975 crime scene matched Franklin Maywood Romine's profile conclusively. After nearly half a century, they could finally close one of their longest-running murder investigations. For Yvonne Pryor, the decades of waiting and wondering finally ended. Science had accomplished what traditional police work alone could not: identifying the man responsible for her daughter's murder.
In May 2023, the Montreal police made their historic announcement. Franklin Maywood Romine had been conclusively identified as Sharron Pryor's killer. The DNA evidence preserved from the 1975 crime scene provided an irrefutable match, solving one of Canada's longest-running cold cases. The investigation revealed that Romine had been in Montreal in 1975, during the time of Sharron's murder. He later returned to the United States, where he died in Virginia in 1982 at the age of 36, decades before he would be identified as Sharron's killer. The breakthrough came through advanced DNA technology and genetic genealogy, methods that didn't exist when the evidence was first collected in 1975. The biological evidence, carefully preserved for nearly 5 decades, finally revealed its secrets through modern science. For the Montreal police, this represented the resolution of a case that had haunted the department for 48 years. The careful preservation of evidence by the original investigators had proven crucial to solving the crime. For Yvonne Pryor and her family, the identification of Romine brought long-awaited answers about who had taken Sharron's life. Though her daughter's killer had died long ago, the truth had finally emerged through scientific advancement and determined investigation.
In May 2023, after 48 years of searching, the Pryor family finally learned the truth about what happened to Sharron. The teenager who never made it to Marina's restaurant that March evening in 1975 would no longer be just another unsolved case in Montreal's history. For Yvonne Pryor, who kept her daughter's story alive through decades of uncertainty, science provided what time alone could not answer. The evidence collected on that grim day in Longueuil, carefully preserved by investigators who never gave up, finally revealed its secrets through advances in DNA technology. Sharron's case revolutionized how Montreal police preserve evidence in major crimes. The path from a teenager's disappearance on Willowbroad Avenue to the identification of Franklin Maywood Romine proved that no case is truly unsolvable. Even after the passage of nearly half a century, even after the killer's death, the truth found its way to light. In the end, it wasn't just DNA science that solved Montreal's longest-running cold case. It was the unwavering determination of a mother, the dedication of investigators, and the power of preserved evidence that finally brought justice for Sharron. If this story moved you, like, comment, and subscribe to hear more about cases where justice finally prevailed. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about the power of DNA technology in solving cold cases?